So one of the things that I love about what we do at Human Garage is gait analysis, is people walking, just simply, you can see so much what happens. And so we learn that in school, but I joke with people, I can count on both hands how many times I actually did that in the 7 years before I joined Human Garage, because it's just not something that typically chiropractors do. So assessing the body is the first thing, just to see how the body's functioning, how it's moving. And you can see a lot of dysfunction or lack of full range of motion or full movement through just a normal analysis. My approach is really about the whole body. So wherever the pain is, and it's kind of our whole approach in Human Garage, but if you have low back pain, that's the end result of your dysfunction. So what's really causing it? Most of the time it's wear and tear, and that's hard because people don't think of twisting an ankle when you're 5 could lead to something that might happen when you're 25. So we're not really aware of our history. A lot of times, and this is very common, people will forget old injuries or accidents that happened when they were younger because there's not an emotional connection or resonance to it.
Like falling through a Ferris wheel
exactly.
At 7.
So we forget these things.
We'll talk about that.
So we forget these things, and because we forget them, we don't realize that that might possibly be causing something else. The other side of it is we're also taught to ignore our pain. We're taught as a society to walk it off, rub it off, and if that doesn't work, then take something like a Tylenol or some type of drug, or even like a topical, like Tiger Balm or something, because all we're doing is covering up and masking. We're not actually dealing with the origin of the issue because we half the time don't remember it. So after assessing the body, seeing how it's moving, then it's really about how to adjust the body. And before I came to Human Garage, I had a very whole body approach. I was working originally from the spine, like we're taught as chiropractors, and kind of working from the outside. I've now changed my approach, working from the outside in. And the idea I usually tell people is like we're working with a rusted door hinge. The body accumulates rust over time, wear and tear, and so if you try to adjust the spine cold turkey, it doesn't mean it can't work. You're just not going to get the added benefits of it because, one, your body's compensating immediately after you've kind of shocked the system, and sometimes it wakes other things up. So a lot of chiropractors, and I don't disregard this as anything negative, it's mainly about the spine, and I completely agree with that aspect. But my counter argument is if you have a knee issue, what do you do about the knee? And the chiropractor said, well, adjust the low back and the nerves from the low back will innervate the knee and helps it reset. And I don't completely disagree with that. I just don't agree with the practice of it. If you have a knee issue, at least look at the knee. And the way I look at it is if you have a knee issue, then you got to look at your ankle, you got to look at your hip, got to see how the other body's compensating, what's the low back, how are the arms moving, because that will affect the knee, maybe not directly, but indirectly, absolutely. And so it's this whole kind of systematic approach of adjusting really everything that the body needs adjusting. So it's not about adjusting the whole body just to adjust it. It's to adjust the whole body that correlates the best with the person and what they need. So what I do now is what's called tuning in. It's our form of applied kinesiology. And so I'm literally asking your body in an energetic level the order of how to adjust it. And then if there's something that does need to be adjusted, then usually skip over it. And if it does, it might not need to be the next thing to adjust it. It could be 5 steps down the line. And that's where the tuning in comes in, because all I'm doing is asking your body, in this case, if that's the next thing I need to work on. If it is, great. And if not, then I'll find out when it is, if it needs to be worked on.
So for people that don't necessarily understand the energy aspect or tuning in, you say you're asking my body what it needs. How do you do that?
Literally tuning in or applied kinesiology is testing a strong and weak signal, trying to find out what works and what doesn't. So different practitioners can use it for different reasons. Nutritionists will test vitamins. So not only is if a vitamin is the right quality of vitamin, if it's a good quality vitamin versus one that's filled with fillers, and then also how many you should be taking. So the way I do it is I'm asking, in this case, if your needs to be adjusted. And it's very simple yes and no questions. That's why the answers are strong and weak, because you got to keep it in a very simple way of doing it. Everything's energy, really, to keep it simple. So if we are learning to tune into an energy of someone, then what we do is we're just asking the energy of that spot what it needs. And by getting a yes or no response, then we know what's a positive or negative answer for that.
So that takes you through your entire process. So oftentimes when you and I work together, You'll have me walk, you'll tune in, you'll figure out what needs to be adjusted. I'll tell you what's ailing me, usually my low back, causing a whole myriad of other problems. And you'll adjust me, then you'll have me get up if that's what the tuning in tells you.
Yes.
And I'll walk again, you'll reassess the gait. And it's this whole process of seeing kind of how the body flows as you do the adjustment.
Yeah. And especially with the reassessment it's so important because once you work on an area, again, how it compensates, how the body reacts is really important. So what I used to do at a lot of places was, simply adjust them, never did any gait analysis, and as they would see how they're feeling, they felt better, and we're like, okay, send you on your way. You miss a big point or a big part of that because they might feel good at that point. But if you give it 5 minutes, something might change. And if they're already out the door, then they're not probably going to come back in because they might be home or something happened. You're missing a good aspect of the healing. And that's really important because if they're not healing the way they should be healing, things are going to fall apart much sooner. So if we're able to have them walk a couple of times, recheck everything, see if there's anything that needs to be worked on, the body will generally tell you, if you're asking the right questions, what it needs and what it doesn't need. And that's what I love about it because you're really telling me what to do. I just have to ask the right questions. So it's always about kind of an energy exchange, for lack of a better term. You're telling me what you need, and I'm kind of responding to that. And then if that is in accordance with what you actually needed, then you're done. If not, then we got to see what we're missing. Because sometimes by just doing really quick work, it could feel great, but there might be something that we could have missed. And again, 2 hours later, you're fine. But a day later, something happens and something falls out of place. Well, what happened? We missed something. And so that's really important because if you miss it, you're going to keep coming back to a lot of the same problems. If you're able to address it, then you're able to kind of move forward with the body.
I got a really bad massage last weekend, as you know, because you've had to fix me 3 times now. But I would love for you to explain just how the fascia works with your adjustments and how just getting a bad massage can completely misalign everything.
Okay. So the fascia was what we learned is more of a kind of simply as like the subconscious of the body, at least in kind of a practical term. It really understands how the body has been torqued. And the cool thing about that is we used to say muscle memory. We really now understand it's the fascia that kind of retains that memory. So if, let's say, you were playing a sport and you got hit in the head, the body remembers that. We might not remember it, but the body does. And so when we're communicating with the fascia, it allows us to communicate really with your subconscious. And the cool part about that is if people have learned about conscious versus subconscious, the conscious really is very limited. Subconscious is infinite. And so the cool part about that is when you're able to talk to more of an infinite source, then what you're able to do is really get some really cool information from there. And since the body happens to remember how the body has been traumatized, for the lack of a better word, and I'm talking like micro traumas, even just standing, on your leg for too long, or sitting for too long, or the best is bad posture. We slouch a lot. Our body holds on to that, and that's why if you try to sit up straight or stand up straight, if you haven't been practicing doing that, your body's going to go to its typical habits. And good habits, as we'll often say, are very difficult because you actually have to work at it. Bad habits are easy because we fall into it very much, but our body remembers that. So as we communicate with the fascia, we're able to get a better understanding of what's going on with your body, and really how it leads to is being able to help you better and help you quicker. Because if we're asking your body the right questions, then we get the right answers instead of a lot of guesswork. So as a chiropractor, we base things on how it feels. Well, that's great, but just because it feels one way doesn't mean that's what it needs. And if you're able to tune in with that energy, then you get an actually more accurate response.
So the other day I was working with Dr. Danny, whenever it was that we were talking about doing the coccyx release she had to do. So we talked about it on her episode, but basically for those that didn't hear it, she had to manually go in with her fingers and release my coccyx and basically the ligaments around it, I guess. Yeah. Because what we found out through tuning in and your energy work, is that you realized I fell when I was 7 head first through a Ferris wheel. You didn't realize that, I told you, but you knew the day basically and when it happened. And you said something happened when you were 7, and I started thinking, and I'm like, I fell head first through a Ferris wheel, no wonder this hurts. And there's a connection between the nose and the coccyx. So this is like a two-pronged question, I guess. One, how are you able to do that, and how like special is that to be able to?
It's practice. I mean, my mom has been doing energy work since I was a kid, and honestly, as a kid, that was one of the reasons probably why I didn't want to be a chiropractor. I was so turned off by it. Like, it was late '80s. It was not my thing. I was trying to be normal like every other kid, and my mom was. And this is in Maryland too, in the 1980s. So it's not even like kind of a very hippy dippy-ish type of place. It's not that's really open to that type of thing. So you kind of move to the opposite side of that. And so the tuning in, from what I've learned, most people can do it. It is a practice, but it's also kind of listening to our gut. Really, the best way to describe it is listening to what our gut is telling us. And going back to how we're taught, we're not taught to listen to our gut. We're usually taught to ignore it. So most people, it's so foreign to them that it's not even like when people see it, they're like, oh, that's so strange or so weird. It's something that even for me was strange and weird, but I got comfortable doing it after practicing it for a while. I'm also blessed to be in a place where we're practicing it all the time. I was the fortunate one to kind of introduce it to most of the staff last year. And it's been fun because I've been doing it for a couple of years by that point, especially pretty regularly. And seeing them practice it's been fun because, you know, a couple of our practitioners months ago couldn't do it, and now you're seeing them little by little getting it. And the best thing about it is it correlates with kind of a sort of confidence. So you have to be able to trust yourself that what you're doing is right. And that's hard because we're so used to doubting ourselves and second guessing ourselves or beating ourselves up that if something doesn't feel right, then we're going to go against the grain. Well, that's part of the feeling. Sometimes when it doesn't feel right, then you know that that's a no, and then you got to go in another direction. But typically, because it doesn't feel right, we're going to do the exact opposite and just completely shut down. And so I would say there's an author, he's not alive anymore, his name is Dr. David Hawkins. He wrote a book called Power versus Force. So he did the scientific study behind it, and he says and estimates about 85% of the people can do it. I'm not going to disagree with that. It sounds about right. I believe that there's some people, whether it's how they grew up, how they're taught, or their own belief systems, they're not willing or ever be really able to do it. Because you have to kind of let go of what we're known and what we see in front of us and realize that to do this type of work, you have to kind of trust something that really we can't see. It's kind of intangible. And that's hard because we're so taught and brought and conditioned to believe and trust what's in front of us. And a lot of the stuff that we do is very, a little on the esoteric side. But when you see it happening and you see it regularly happen, people start to just kind of trust the process, even though they don't understand it.